We now continue with a closer look at the business models and operating lessons that can connect Silicon Valley with Egypt's digital economy. Our next conversation is From Silicon Valley to the Nile, American business models powering Egypt's digital economy. Silicon Valley has shaped some of the world's most influential approaches to entrepreneurship, investment, and scale. But successful ideas cannot simply be copied from one market to the other. This panel will discuss how lessons on product market fit, fundraising, team culture, technology, and regional expansion can be thoughtfully adapted to Egypt. Moderating the discussion is Farida Yehia, Program Officer for Government Relations and Economic Development at the Center for International Private Enterprise. She is joined by Ahmed Gaballah of SOKNA, Rofail, General Partner at Openner.vc, and Abdelhameed Sharara, Founder and Chief Executive Officer for Riseup. Please welcome Farida and our panelists to the stage.
Hello, good morning. Hi everyone, I'm Farida Yehia, Program Officer at CIPE, and so excited to be here. So welcome to our session, American Business Models Powering Egypt's Digital Economy. And I'm super excited to be hearing the three very distinct perspectives. First of all, we have, starting with Ahmed Gaballah, our founder and CEO of SOKNA, one of Egypt's leading health tech startups that is transforming funeral planning and end-of-life services through technology. Ahmed has built a company around solving a deeply human challenge, showing how innovation can create impact even in industries that many people would have never expected to be disrupted, and I'm delighted to be moderating a session with you again. And Abdelhameed Sharara, a founder and CEO of Riseup, an organization behind MENA's largest entrepreneurship platform. Riseup has connected thousands of entrepreneurs, investors, corporates, mentors, and on a personal note, as a Gen Z, I've attended probably each and every edition of Riseup. and Gen Z, connecting Gen Z as well. And finally, we have joining us Rofail, General Partner at Openner.vc, a Washington, D.C.-based venture capital firm. Ash is a technology and entrepreneur, investor, and business leader with extensive experience building and scaling companies across AI, venture capital, education, and real estate, and he has invested in more than 130 startups across the US. And he brings like a truly global perspective on innovation, investment, and scaling technology businesses. So let's begin with a very the idea of the startup. So behind every successful company is the founder who really saw the opportunity where others saw a challenge. And this is where I'd like to start off with Ahmed, talking as with a founder's perspective. SOKNA entered an industry that just a few people imagined that was really transformed through technology, and not many people were had an idea of starting a business in this industry. So what convinced you that there was a real opportunity, and what was the moment that you realized that SOKNA was becoming a real business rather than just an idea? So let's start off with this.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you for the invitation, and it's an honor to be on this panel. And I'm so glad to be with you on another panel again. So just a little bit of context here. And the reason why I'm on this panel is I actually spent most of my career in the Silicon Valley. I was working in tech for 16 years. I was lucky to be at the right place at the right time. So I did work at Google, Adobe, and Facebook, and so on. And like Farida mentioned, I'm actually now working on transforming something that's quite sensitive, which is basically how do we change and transform and lead change in the end-of-life space, which is something nobody really wanted to touch. But the reason why I moved back after 16 years in California is It was driven from a very personal experience where basically I have come across a friend of mine, his dad passed away here in Egypt, and the whole experience was very traumatic and very challenging for the whole family. And I was really touched by that day, and that's actually what drove me to really think about the space and about the problem that's on hand, and really made me think over the past, over 13 years, to consider coming back, or like just actually doing something about something that is a very old school traditional business that nobody really had wanted or like had tried to really transform, whether through tech or whether to really think about a human first experience that can be changing and really transforming the space.
Okay, so, and you use technology in specific with this sector, and if you'd like to talk about this specific area.
So, because of my background in tech, a lot of people assumed, oh, this guy's gonna come back to Egypt and is just gonna build a product, right? So originally I was a product manager working on international markets and growing products and so on. But because loss is a very very sensitive topic, right? SOKNA, my company, is a human first company, right? So it's not really like about, it was not really about, oh, like we have a goal, let's like create a product, but it's rather like the way we think about it is like what are problems that we want to solve.
Yeah.
And from there are 3 pillars that SOKNA always thinks about in terms of tech, right? One of them is how can we really create a solution that is customer facing, that is very sensitive, that respects the sensitivity of this time of loss and like grieving and all of that, right? So that's number one. The second one, how can you use tech to really improve and have and build reliable logistics and reliable operations in general. And then the last pillar that we always think about as well is what Engineer Mahmoud I was mentioning earlier about data. How can we actually leverage data and analytics to continuously improve the process and to really improve quality? We've been building a lot of things internally, and we've been actually operating for the past 7 years, and we're actually building stuff that will be out in public for the users as well.
Okay, perfect. That's why I wanted to start with the idea itself, because I wanted to highlight that this is how like the technology has really shaped the way that startups have started their businesses, and it's evolving in that way. So this is where I wanted to talk with Sharara, and you've obviously had like a front row seat to Egypt's startup ecosystem, and this is where I wanted to ask, like, looking back, what's like the biggest shift you've witnessed? Like, are founders today more ambitious than they were like 10 years ago, or has that, like, with the presence and very strong presence of AI and technology, and we'll talk more about that.
Thank you, Farida, for the amazing moderation, and it's a pleasure to meet you guys as well all the time. When we started Riseup, it was back in 2013. Just to give you a macro context, it was a very transitional year in the history of the country. There was not yet an operating government. So the whole notion of starting a business wasn't as trendy as today, right now, right? In fact, the majority of pre-2011 perception of an entrepreneur was mainly that it's related to somehow corruption or other sort of use of banking funding. Fast forward, post-2013, we started Riseup as an ecosystem platform. So the idea was that the VCs, entrepreneurs, the media, the government, the service providers, the accelerators, the angel investors, everyone coming together, sort of the purpose of pushing a startup. Just to give you one example, there was a company before SOKNA started, and it was called El Wafiyat, had amazing 4 co-founders, very well-educated, very driven with purpose and all of that. But at that time, the ecosystem wasn't mature enough, and the market wasn't mature enough to support them to grow. I think 5 or 6 years later, Ahmed, with also, of course, learnings and a lot of experience and tweaking, was able to probably fundraise and scale and grow. And this is sort of what's going on. There's a lot on the maturity side. 2.5, I think at least $2.5 billion were invested in startups in Egypt in the past 10 years. The majority or the super majority of them was about FDI. So those are VCs from the Valley or from elsewhere that invested here. In fact, the Egyptian contribution, the Egyptian VC contribution collectively in the past 10 years did not surpass $200 or $300 million in that side. So there's more maturity. The culture now, today you talk to anyone, right? There are programs on TV, but there's also the events, and there's tons of things happening on the culture side. Companies are more mature. They're also solving problems that make everyday life easier in an emerging market. And I was just last week with a company called Thunder, for instance, and they opened shop. That's one of the largest investment platforms in the region right now, because they opened shop in Saudi, UAE, and they changed the whole capital market perception in the region. So I'm very proud of the journey of the entrepreneurs and the startups. There's definitely a lot to work on. There's a lot of policy that has been also engaged in the past couple of years. We've seen a massive interest from the government to sort of resolve all of the hurdles and sometimes get away from the hurdles as well. So that's my overview in the past 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for this very optimistic perspective. As we were talking, Ash, outside, like from an investor's perspective now, I wanted to ask, like, how does Egypt compare to like other emerging markets, and like should Egypt continue like adapting international models, or like build its own model that fits them locally?
All right, well, thanks for having me on, and it's great to be with Ahmed and Sharara. They're both, I was talking to someone yesterday, I said I'm speaking, I don't know Ahmed, just met him, and they said, oh, Ahmed is a genius, so you're doing something really, really good and something useful, and Sharara has built an entire ecosystem. I think, to answer your question, over the last 10 years, 13 years now, I think Egypt succeeded in what I call the awareness phase, you know, that there is an ecosystem called startups. So I don't think we have a problem in the startup formation side of the equation. I think we have a problem with startup cycle completion. Okay, so we have, and those are the models that we need to see. How can we get the Silicon Valley purely from an operating system of getting a startup started and then completing the full cycle? But how can I do that here in Egypt? Because it seemed to only get stuck on wheel 3. You know, you have a lot of awareness. We have tons of incubators, accelerators, competition programs, you know, you name it, that succeed in forming startups. We have some success in seed, and then a little bit in growth, and then we go into what I called, you know, the funding scale-up death valley. It's just nothing happens after that, so there's a cliff. So the focus now, after 13 years of building the ecosystem, is to actually work on the second tier and the third tier and see how that would work. Some components from Silicon Valley could work. Some components will not work. Some of the assumptions in Silicon Valley are valid only for Silicon Valley and the region. They're not valid in Egypt, so it can never be copy and paste. So there needs to be a lot more work to get that to the final stage, which is exit, which is really the ultimate goal.
Okay.
And not for all startups, by the way.
Yeah, well, sorry.
If you don't mind, I just want to ask Ash and Ahmed on a question,
Yes.
wearing your hat. Because you guys have seen it elsewhere as well. I've had the chance to travel multiple places. What Ash is pointing at is a real bottleneck, right? There's, especially on the exit side, and the whole idea of the VCs making money is usually by exit at some point, and the whole cycle is there. Where do you see the gap? Like, what's the ultimate sort of reasoning for that sort of gap at this side?
Okay, so I think one of the reasons we want to be very candid, I think we ask the wrong questions. And I think the question is, how do we make a unicorn? And the question is not how do we make a unicorn, is the question, how do you get a company prepared so a VC can invest in it so that it can become a unicorn? So that's a different thing. I think we also, for the region, one of the gaps is that we've categorized all startups that are formed in the exact same category, and we told them that they have to walk the same path, and it's not necessarily true. So in order to attract VCs, you have to understand what the VC objective is. My objective in Invest is I hope to get 10 to 20 to 30x return. If I don't see a path to that, it could be a company that I love. It could be a company that is showing great customer acquisition. It's a company that has all the right metrics in it. But there's a company that would never take my investment and return 20x. So I have to categorize this company as a good lifestyle company. This is a lifestyle startup, meaning continue growing, build up your employees, 10, 20, 30 employees, provide a good revenue for them, continue to acquire customers, find new opportunities to expand, but it's not an investment. So you have to look at what is an investment. Just the punchline is it will never be in consumer apps. Okay, you will never get your return on consumer apps. You can make good money. So you'd have to shift and see what can Egypt be positioned to actually attract these investments, and it's going to be an enterprise, right? And you're going to have to be a global company, and you're going to have to show expansion from day one that you have a global strategy. That's what brings an investor, that brings in money, that creates an exit, and creates then the compounding effect, and that's what happened in Silicon Valley. Every exit in Silicon Valley creates 10 other startups. Employees get rich, second-time founders, and then you have the compounding effect, and we really need to get to that point to get that compounding effect, but it's going to be in a different direction.
Yeah, I think I will highlight a couple of things that I've been observing. I think one of them is, which is also a key, is the selection of the investors for the startup. One thing we were very, very careful about is we wanted to get investors who are seeing not just we don't want people who are investing just because it's a lifestyle investment or something that just, it's a goodwill or whatever. No, we want people that actually see our vision and can see that, okay, so we're putting together a roadmap and a vision. We want them to really buy into that. And what's very, very important is to execute towards that roadmap and be aligned with the support and everything that we need to get from a VC. Actually, and I think that's a little bit of a challenge in the Middle East and in Egypt, which is a lot of the VCs don't have the maturity level that exists in the Silicon Valley. A lot of our VCs that actually are within the SOKNA investment are from the Silicon Valley, whether it's Mentors Fund or whether it's Asian Company and so on, and they do get it, that it's not a short term, and they also understand the other part, which I'm going to highlight, which is the challenge of getting things done in this market. It's not as easy and a walk in the park as it would be in a Western world. We have policies that we're changing, we're working with different people, we're changing mindsets and so on, and that's another thing, exactly what you mentioned, what Ash mentioned a while ago, which is basically year 3, year 4 are very challenging, and that was exactly what we were also facing. We got devaluation, right? We got the whole economy was going down and so on. So we had to really adopt and make a change. And this is a very, very challenging phase. But we were able to pass it through a lot of being flexible and adopting all the different changes and just the experience level that we've seen across all these different startups. So definitely Middle East is not easy, but it's also part of the challenge. It's very, very enjoyable. I wake up in the morning, so many things are going wrong, so many things you have to deal with, so many things you're really learning about day to day, and it's amazing in that sense.
I love how you guys all touched on the fact that not one size, the misconception of one size does not fit all, and I feel I'd like to address a question to all of you since we all have this idea. If you guys had to remove one obstacle for the Egyptian startup scene today, what would it be? Would it be the funding, the regulation, or the talent, the founder readiness? What do you guys think it is? And also, Sharara, I'd love for you to talk about the Riseup Startup Manifesto. I think you guys also touched on that. So please.
I can be very quick. I think I've seen a lot of change over the past. Okay. We've been operating for 7 years. And I do agree with you that there's a lot of challenges and so on. One thing I did see, and this is honest truth, not bullshit, which is basically the change in the way government and policies are actually more open to change and adapting to what a startup needs. Like when I first came back to Egypt, it was very tough to actually lobby for something that we wanted to get done, or like change of a certain law or so on. But the past 3 years, we've seen an honest support and a true kind of will to adapt and get these startups to succeed. And this has been a true, I think it still needs a lot of work, but over time I've seen it change. Maybe the last 3 years it's been changing a lot faster than the prior 4
More
years.
conversations are being held as well.
And action.
And
Like,
action.
where we announced a bunch of things like the past few weeks and so on, and we're doing a lot of things that weren't allowed for the private sector, and this is also only a result of talking and discussing and changing like policies and laws and things like that together with the government.
Ash, what's your take?
I don't know about the manifesto, but it seems like it's a really great idea if it's going to have a framework that addresses all the different issues. So we have to recognize that it's not just a one thing. It's not a how do we get investors here, right? The journey of getting investors here has a lot of moving parts, including revamping how current incubators, accelerators, all of that work, right? Part of it is shifting the incentives for some of these programs, whether they're private programs or government programs. These programs are incentivized on the number of cohorts, the number of startups, the number of jobs that's created. None of these are relevant. It needs to shift to a different incentive model with how many startups complete the cycle, how many startups are funding ready, how many startups are enterprise or global focused, how many startups are global expansion ready. Those are the incentives. We don't have the right incentives for these programs. And that was right for the period, for the past period, because you're introducing a new type of business or type of organization called startup building, so there's awareness. And you needed that volume. You need sort of that, groundswell of volume. But then that's one of many things that needs to be addressed before you start closing down the cycle. So it'd be interesting to see what the manifesto would have. I'd love to hear about it and see what pieces needs to be filled. And part of it is complete mindset shift. A simple example is we've encouraged a lot of consumer apps, and I'm sorry, I'm an enterprise guy, so I'm biased, I admit. But there's a big difference between a consumer app and there's a misconception, actually, advantage to say that Egypt has 10,000. We're 110,000 consumers. We really are not 110 million consumers. Whatever, 120. Those 10 million extra are not going to bring the revenue. So we start kind of by looking at what is the percent I can get from those. And a lot of startups fail down that path. Instead of I can look at how many 100 enterprises that are losing $5 million a year that I can sell them something for $100,000, that solves a problem. And that's a very different path. So we need to start shifting and moving a lot of knobs to get to where we need to be.
Firstly, on the policy side, so I come from a legal background by education, but I actually decided literally to dump that and start my own business. I know it's a surprise. And I was always, whenever I had a meeting with any government official, bluntly, the first 5 years of starting Riseup, I had massive government and security issues of starting an event in downtown Cairo, post-2013, bringing together thousands of people. Most of them are coming from abroad. So you can think of the perception back then. Fast forward, things have completely changed. We've managed collectively as an ecosystem to develop something called the Startup Manifesto back in 2019. And it was just the idea was it's a white paper that has an overview of all of the primary and secondary research that has been done on the challenges facing the startup ecosystem. And then having work on focus groups from the ecosystem, from all the stakeholders, to sort of challenge or tackle each one of them in a very straightforward change side. Many years later, recently last year, the government has 2 years ago actually literally has created groups from representatives from that sector, and then transformed this into something called the Egyptian Startup Charter, which is basically working on that basis and continuing the amount. The Prime Minister even attended the event, His Excellency Mustafa Madbouli, last summit a few months ago to announce that. And they recently announced, because there was a gap, every single ministry was sort of wanting to support entrepreneurship, but everyone was kind of competing. So they decided to have some sort of a unit that reports directly to the Prime Minister to be able to resolve challenges the startups have on a specific side, but also work across horizontally across all the challenges that are there. So that's on the policy side. It was a collective effort. I think probably hundreds of meetings has happened, thousands of hours was put into this. So it has some sort of substance and a guidance, because every single time someone from the World Bank is visiting, or from the IFC, or from any investment entity coming and asking us in a focus group of what are the challenges, what are the solutions, this is an easy way to sort of like have it documented, but also backed by a majority of the stakeholders. It's interesting on the B2B versus sort of consumer apps. So Egypt has raised in the past 6 months, about $300 million Egyptian startups. That's an impressive number in the region, comparable to the macroeconomics that we're facing, right? Especially that in the past few years, the Gulf was rising a lot. There are things that are shifting or affecting that, but that's at least a sort of a testament. Those apps, sort of like, or businesses, there were 12 businesses, if I can recall. 90% of them were consumer businesses. One of them is value, the other one was breakfast, and so on and so forth. There's an interesting shift that is happening, because I really think the B2B is where the gold is, right? But there's been an interesting shift from investors looking at the consumer side, but also there's an interesting change in consumer behavior, whereby I'm seeing, like a few months ago, one of my friends launched an e-commerce business, basically a white label e-commerce business for everywhere but New Cairo and so we say Egypt and Masr, right? So everyone, he calls it like e-commerce for Masr, not for Egypt. So and he's shown me numbers, and the perspectives are very, very interesting. You find like a 55 years old mother in Abbasiyah or in Tanta starting to order this sort of like package to her place, and it takes a different route from the normal easy number by number registration route. So there's something happened. And also on the last side, one of those consumer that I cannot mention right now, but one of those consumer companies that is probably valued today at $300-400 million, especially in e-commerce, is actually IPOing in the Egyptian market in a few months, in about 6 months from now. And that's going to be probably one of the first ones. And I've already heard 3 or 4 of those companies playing towards IPO, because literally what Ash was just saying, you don't have, usually in the Valley or elsewhere in Europe, you have family funds that basically buy those companies, or you have institutional investors that sort of buy, or they get acquired by Meta or one of those companies. That doesn't exist that much here. It exists if those companies like Amazon has acquired Sue in Dubai. Amazon invested in Value in Egypt with a big investment, and so on. So I think in the coming 6 to 12 months, hopefully things will shift a bit.
It's good.
And I just had one quick comment, because I forgot to give a lot of credit for Riseup and for Sharara for the government facilitation and kind of like, pursuing them to change and to, I've learned about Riseup since I was in the Silicon Valley. Actually, the first round, I think it was like one of the very early ones, and I know that you guys started very small, and the last time that I've seen Riseup, it was pretty much the whole government was there. And this is also like just, one side of showing the influence that we're able to just bridge the gap of communication that existed, and also the shift in the mindset of government and policymakers that are really willing to help support the startups. We just need to basically do a lot more of that and continue to have these conversations.
That's very true, because we were stuck with the implementation gap for so long, and now it's good to actually see this change. But I really need to bring in AI into this conversation, because we can't it's impossible to have this conversation today without AI. But as you guys also were talking, and there's also a noticeable, like the speed of pace in terms of technology, and AI it might be faster than the pace of the ideas and the current talent, existing talent here today. So first off, I'd like to hear from like a founder's perspective, Ahmed, like how has AI changed the way you think about your business? Like if you were starting SOKNA today, like how differently would have you started it with AI?
Yeah, so it actually like when we've seen AI and like the growth of AI and the way we can use it, we actually built internally at SOKNA an R&D, research and development, and basically an engineering department that not just focuses on using the existing applications of AI, but also thinking through the problem solving and how we can use technology to achieve our vision. And our vision, which is basically leading and becoming the leading platform globally for end-of-life services. By saying this vision, we actually have to pioneer technology and using technology to really solve problems. And of course, we have to be on top of what we can do using AI and so on. So we actually, I was very lucky having like an amazing director of engineering who's leading that, so she gets all the credit. But basically, we've been looking at AI to build the three pillars I talked about. One is to really like tailor the consumer first, because as I mentioned, we're working in a very sensitive space, which is basically loss. So we're using AI to very tastefully produce products that can lead people to have a way to experience or to deal with this moment in a much easier way. Make it a little bit less challenging. At the end of the day, using AI or tech or whatever, it's not going to change the problems we are solving at SOKNA, but we're doing this to ease the problem a little bit. That's number one, and we've been investing a lot on that. We didn't yet launch publicly the products we're building, but we are building them, being tested now, so we're waiting.
Great.
And we have a plan for the release. But the second pillar, which we've been doing since day one, is actually we've been using a lot of data. From day one, SOKNA has been collecting all the data that you can think of and the ones that you cannot think of, and we've been leveraging that to build very, very reliable, whether it's operations, logistics, decision-making, and so on. Now, AI comes into play, and so we've been, the work we've been doing that was taking so much time, now we can actually expedite it a lot faster. So we leverage all the data that we've had, all the customer interactions we've had to really understand what are the pain points, what are the solutions we can introduce, but then also to improve our own internal logistics, dispatch, and so on. To give you very, very quick context is because we deal with funerals, right? It's very, very sensitive. And unlike the US or the Western world, funerals can take days, but in Egypt it takes 4 hours. Like in 4 hours, you need to have everything done right for the family, and you cannot go wrong. It's a one-time shot, and you cannot go wrong. It's not like any consumer product or a solution. And so we've been building a lot of things that can help with the dispatch, the operations, the reliability of the logistics internally, and that's how SOKNA has been able to build the reputation it has today.
Okay, and obviously, Ash, as an investor, you've heard a lot of pitches just using the word AI as like, so beyond the hype. Let's talk about beyond the hype. How do you like separate genuine innovation using AI from the overly used? We were just discussing it.
So I'm at a particular advantage as an investor because my PhD was in AI. So I've written a lot about AI. I taught at Hopkins in AI. So I tend to have a more critical eye towards that. Yes, it's true. Every pitch now is AI. I've seen the technology cycles the last 30 years, and I've seen what the gold rush in every technology creates. And it creates bad applications, bad solutions, because back in the day when I was a developer, I was a hardcore developer, and then new tools come in that makes development, building application more visual. You've seen that. So a new group of people kind of join that crowd. It's easy to create an app gets released, app fails, and the cycle goes on. So my concern with AI is the gold rush, is that we're going to have a lot of people rushing into AI, claiming pieces, and then we're going to see fallout of that, whether in startups or even enterprises applying AI. So there's sort of a cautionary tale there. For AI implementation, you'd really have to look, you asked specifically from an investor point of view, So I asked whether it's AI native, whether is this something, a solution that to build in the past because the complexity or the number of resources that are required, or because of the data, the volumes of data that needs to churn wasn't available. So you evaluate that whether it's a new solution or is it sort of a plug-in AI because something just now flashy. And I also look at the team. Does the team actually have institutional AI experience, or are they English majors that have spent some time around tech and now they are the chief AI officer? So we evaluate the teams. Do you really have deep expertise? And at least you need to have some practical applied AI in something. So we look at these valuations and really see if it's real AI, or it doesn't have an AI, but it's a great solution. It doesn't, suddenly it's not a requirement that every successful startup must have AI in it. I mean, there's still a lot of great ideas. I'm sure in your business, AI is not a front-facing thing. It's a back office thing to help them optimize the business. So, at the end, I'm happy with the user experience. I don't need AI. I don't need to talk to a chatbot about organizing.
It's very scary at this point.
So it depends on the application level and how real it is and how impactful and whether that adds value or doesn't.
Sharara, you wanted to add a point?
I'll try to be as blunt as I can on what I've seen recently, because there's a lot of companies that are basically running, smart-looking algorithms on Excel, and then calling it AI. So that's a huge side, and it's not just from the region. I've had at some point one of the companies that was perceived in Europe as the leading AI enabler 5 years ago, pre the hype, and then when someone with Ash's experience dug into it, started to realizing that this is beautifully written equations on Excel, which is, I know that the early basis, but the application isn't there. So I'm very cool. Whenever there's a hype, I think you have to be very, very cautious and really wait and see a lot. Also on the macro side, there's an AI war happening, right, between all the AI apps coming up from the US and competing with each other, and then the ones in China, and then the ones in Russia, and then the ones in currently coming from South Korea and other places. So this is interesting, and I think that war sort of someone's going to win and continue. But the interesting part for me for AI that I would like to see more is on longevity, on wellness, on transportation. I've been hearing a lot more R&D based companies that have very smart researchers or engineers that are building really interesting stuff in Egypt and the region as well. And that's where I think the shift has to happen, and even on the media side and on the real stories that will save things. It's not just about a search and access to information, which is incredible. I think that has shifted a lot, and everyone's now not going to doctors and asking their own ChatGPT on advice, but there's more on the verticals in life sciences and sports. I just met a company that is doing incredible analytics on sports. They can literally, with a camera, after 1 hour of filming one athlete, predict that this will be possibly the best or not, and they're Mo Salah of football, or they're like the Farida in tennis and so on. So that's where my stance in general. We've recently, a week ago or less, with A15, one of our backers at Riseup and the holding level, we've launched an AI accelerator. So sort of to be able to pinpoint that a few days ago, and we're starting with $5 million. That would be investment. The majority of the funding is coming from founders, so it's a founder-to-founder VC private capital. We're not accepting public or developmental capital to be able to really give the right advice to the companies to serve. So we're very excited about that. That's a first of its own AI accelerator in Egypt and the region probably. And we've seen already, since the announcement, we've announced that also with NVIDIA last week. And we've seen that announcement sort of bringing interesting people that are, as I mentioned, from a science or a research background with really technical, strong know-how coming and venturing into that space because they realized that there's possible capital to invest in such businesses.
I think it's also a very good guide for like younger entrepreneurs that are pretty lost or overwhelmed with the hype.
Absolutely. It's
of
very
the-
educational. There's a curriculum, there's education, but it also builds a lot on the peer-to-peer education. The majority of people who taught me in my life were entrepreneurs that have done it, right? I was very lucky with Khalid Bishara, Allah yarhamu, passed away a few years ago. I got a lot of, and Kareem as well today, but also there's a guy who worked at P&G and started his own business 10 years ago, who was the first person to tell me what's a service level agreement or something like that, with someone with a background side. So the learning that comes from peer to peer, whenever you put a group of founders in a room, there's a lot of learning that can be shared. And I think Ahmed has done a great job with showing such an example, and I'm sure Ahmed and Ash and everyone's mentoring others. So that's the basis where I think the knowledge happens as well.
And Ash and Ahmed, I'm interested also to know like your take on what sectors do you think are very promising and like to be transformed by AI in Egypt over the next few years, like the sectors, what you have like any guesses on that? Like, what's your take?
No, I'm just going to say I'm too busy. I haven't been able
On
to
your
think about
side.
it. So I'll let you answer that.
Every sector and every division in every organization. And that's really the difference of AI as a general answer. Okay. Now, how do you use it? The implementation of it is, but it's applicable in every sector. I think startups or even individuals can use AI or the availability of tools to address and build solutions to domains and sectors that they are very familiar with, okay, that they couldn't in the past build because you need a team and you need, build an entire organization. Now you can actually have a one-person company that can build a solution in a domain that you really understand, and you go through rapid experiments to see if that gets traction or not. I wrote a paper just out of boredom on you can build a startup for $10,000 if you understand several of the moving parts within an AI model. So a $5 million fund, I challenged it, can build 500 AI startups, and then you play the numbers game and see what sinks and what swims. Why? Because you can accelerate the development, you can accelerate the experiment, and you can expedite the failure. And the failure, then it's done, out, come to the next level. So that's how you can use kind of rapid recycling of AI tools and be able to address every, multiple sectors. So in my view, every sector could benefit from that. Again, another biased view, but I truly believe that.
I just want to say there's a term called vibe coding, right? It's basically the new norm on web development, as Ash has been talking. It's literally about recycling code and also automating web and mobile development through artificial intelligence. And that's the basis. This is why we focus on a very small fund, because we believe that a lot of the companies have to sort of, prototype. We used to prototype for 3 to 6 months in the past, at least, right? Today you can just prototype in a day, literally have a full operating beta app live in about 24 hours or less than sometimes. So there's a huge shift. The barrier to entry for starting your own technology business is sort of completely eroded. The hard part is usually, back to the initial conversation where you guys started, is actually scaling that business and competing, because the competition is now way wider, right? Someone with no technological background is able to start a business in a few days in tech, but the ability to run a business and hire people and maintain culture and translate those visions and strategies into executionable outcomes and outputs, that's the challenge. And this is where I think the agency will happen in the upcoming part.
Yeah, I think also you guys highlighted the fact that it needs to be like properly implemented, like in the right way that fits the local market and not just like, again, as Ash was referring to in the beginning of our panel, like not like imitating or copy and pasting the exact model. I feel like this is where the gap really remains. But thank you again for this, like we had like a very distinct perspective from all of you, like from an investor's perspective, like ecosystem and a founder's perspective. And I really feel like the message that really remains is that there are many opportunities, hopefully, optimistically. And in AI, we think that there is like a major chance for like startups and the ecosystem to adopt in the right way that fits their businesses. But again, I feel like these conversations is what's going to keep the momentum going and allow us to really like take on to these opportunities. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and yeah, it's a pleasure.